having me share some thoughts from this report. It's a report which has been written with colleagues in Milan and Munich, and it's a kind of first step, I must say. There's much more to be done, but we wanted to have some impact. You'll see there's a lot of overlap between the report and many of the things which have been said so far, and of course the conclave report. Also what Agnieszka said and the others said as well. So you'll see a lot of agreement. There will be a little bit more on the economic side, of course, but by and large, I want to start with the idea that Europe has a serious competitiveness challenge. So if you look at the productivity per hour, I'm not saying productivity per capita, it's true that in Europe we work less than in the US, but productivity per hour of work, well, it's about 33% of what it is in the US. And that really means really some loss of purchasing power for the Europeans. Now, it can be a society's choice, of course, the second number is really the per capita GDP. And as I said, it's mainly a productivity gap. We have this lack in productivity, and there are many reasons for that, but innovation is really a key reason. Innovation is lacking. As I said, there's a loss in purchasing power, and there's also a very high risk of loss of geopolitical influence and of sovereignty. I mean, if we don't have AI and health and so on, then we are going to be in trouble for various issues like defense. And of course, we also have a debt problem, which is very important in many countries of Europe. Now, we face general prime. So what I'm going to focus on, which is basically Horizon Europe, but it's going to be broader than Horizon Europe. But there are many issues. So it's not like one reform to solve everything. There are general issues having to do with education, of course, and I remind you of the very poor ratings of France in the PISA ranking. It has to do with an investment, and we'll come back to that, which in terms of level is not bad, but in terms of competition it is. There is an issue with very slow and bureaucratic decision making. That has been noted already, but it's broader than just innovation. There's an issue with high energy costs, and there is an issue, and we are not the only one to have this issue with demography. Now, in terms of innovation, we have several issues. One is the labor market institutions, which is inadequate in general, but particularly so for startups. Why is that? I mean, people who work in startups are usually very highly qualified people who can find a job very quickly if they are laid off by their company. Furthermore, being laid off is very common and very frequent, because if you do disruptive innovation, that means that you will fail very often. I mean, that's part of the game. High-stake, high-risk projects, they are bound to fail with decent probability, and therefore people have to reallocate. Now, the labor market institutions are not the proper ones for this kind of environment. We have this issue with universities, which honestly are not on par. We get lots of talents in university in Europe. Actually, there is a study by an economist, Berkeley, which shows that actually a lot of academic articles cited by patents are, at least in some of the fields, and it's not a general study, come from European universities. And we all know that, and a reminder of the quality of science in Europe so far, except that we tend to lose many of the top talents. The ERC has slowed down the process, but it's still an issue. We have to keep the talents in Europe, as has been noticed many times in the last 2 hours. But those talents do not benefit our economies by and large. I mean, the knowledge doesn't quite make it to the private sector. Again, we can think of many exceptions, but the big picture is this one. Then we suffer from the absence of a single market that has been noted as well. The capital market, the digital market, public procurement is pretty important, for example, for the defense industry. And then we have 27 labor laws. That's not easy to be a startup in Europe. And last thing is that, if you look, again, there might be exceptions, but, teaching of entrepreneurship is basically absent, the big picture, the macro picture, at the undergraduate and even at the graduate level. So, the students are not prepared to become entrepreneurs, even so there's been some progress made in that dimension. To rehash the obvious, the EU is losing the global innovation race, and that has a number of consequences that I've mentioned already. So in terms of R&D spending, you remember this number, we are very far from the 3% Lisbon goal 24 years ago. It's only 2% of GDP, but that's not the only thing. But clearly there is too little spending. The discrepancy with respect to the US is entirely the business R&D. So both the US and Europe spend about 0.7 of GDP on R&D in public money. But then if you look at private money, it's 1.2% of GDP for Europe and 2.3% of GDP for the US. So the big gap is actually the private sector R&D, and we try to understand why it's the case. Now, the outcomes are kind of obvious. We are way behind in software, in hardware, in AI, and even biotech. We have pharmaceutical strengths, but they are at risk. And if you look at the top 20 tech companies, there is not a single European company. And top 20 startups, same thing. I mean, we have some companies which are very close to that, to the number 20 mark, but by and large, we are nowhere. We are way behind. And the numbers are quite different. Take what I'm going to tell you with a grain of salt, because I'm really comparing apples and oranges. So here are numbers. Top 4 tech companies last year spent 140 billion in R&D. When BARDA contracted for COVID vaccines, by the way, it's very interesting. It chose only 6 teams and was humble enough to select the 3 technologies, 2, and 2. So basically didn't put all the eggs in the same basket. And this humility was very important because that's how we got messenger RNA. And that's very important. But here, by the way, the economists had proposed much more than that, actually. They wanted much more than 11 billion. Because the human cost, the economic cost was so big that it could have justified much more money still. But in the end, it worked out well. In Europe, if we talk about Horizon Europe, for all fields, we are talking about 11, 12 billion. To be sure, a lot of 90% of the R&D money in Europe is member state money, but this is not disruptive innovation. So you would expect the disruptive innovation to be part of Horizon Europe. Yes, but if we look at it pretty well, it's only about 450 or 470 million for disruptive innovation. Basically, the Pathfinder and the transition programs, which are very, very small programs. And we have this issue that we have a mid-tech positioning. So if you look at 20 years ago, the US and the EU, you look at the biggest R&D companies, and they look very similar. You had Ford and GM for the the US, you have Mercedes-Benz and Volkswagen for Europe. And you look 20 years later, well, it's on Polytech in the US, and in Europe it's still Volkswagen, Mercedes-Benz, and Bosch. By the way, I was totally amazed when my colleagues gave me the number, which is 50% of private R&D in Europe is the automobile sector. This is amazing because that makes our position extremely fragile. And I'm going to come back to that. We focus on low value creation, low profit margins, and of course a risk of leapfrogging. Because with batteries, with electric cars, with autonomous driving and so on and so forth, we may well be leapfrogged by the Americans and the Chinese anyway. So we have put all eggs in the same basket, and it's pretty. I'm not suggesting we should stop building cars, but it's just a very dangerous situation. And this mid-tech positioning, when the US is high-tech, explain in big part actually the quantity difference in the R&D budget. I told you the private sector spends 1.2% of GDP in the EU on R&D, and it's much more in the US. No surprise, the high-tech sector is much more R&D intensive than the mid-tech sector. And we may wonder whether we're really not facing a mid-tech trap. The next question is, does the EU have the institution it takes to meet the 21st century challenge? Now, I'm going to talk about EU R&D support, not member state support, but most of the latter is not disruptive anyway. Now, Horizon Europe has been heralded as the European DARPA, but it's not. I mean, we have to realize that less than, as I mentioned earlier, less than 5% of supports disruptive innovation. Much of the funds are aimed at remedying capital market imperfection, so basically financing mostly mature SMEs, not startups, so to speak. It's really a venture capital investment program rather than support to breakthrough innovation, and you see that because it's late in the process. The TRL is usually above 5. When you compare with ARPA, which TRLs more like 3 or 4. Okay. In fact, we basically support mid-tech projects, which actually may even crowd out business R&D. I don't know about that, but even it's so late in the process, it may actually crowd out the business R&D. Okay. So you all know about this slide. I mean, this is the decomposition of Horizon Europe between Pillar 1. Pillar 1 is the ERC, and basically, I agree with what has been said about the ERC. I mean, it's, well, of course, I'm biased, but it's really the exception in Europe, where scientists, and especially top scientists, are basically selecting the project. But it's an exception. We have to realize it's an exception. Then we have Pillar 2, which is interesting, but it has many flaws I will come back to. And then if you look at really what the early stage component, you get transition and pathfinder, which are extremely small slices here. So the second thing is that we need a different governance to fulfill our ambition. So today we have decision making which is under political control. The board members are not required to be leading scientists, and when they are not highly cited the way the board of the ERC are. I mean, they get the board on the ERC board. There's many more citation and et cetera, et cetera. The program managers also are too few. The ERC, for example, has 9 program manager versus over 100. I don't know the exact number for DARPA. But with 9 managers, how can you cover all fields? I mean, you miss. Even if they are very good, you miss a lot of expertise. So it's very hard to choose. And also those program managers have no authority to enter and flexibly administer contracts and grant agreements. And there are lots of bureaucratic rules. Even so, there's been some progress. We must recognize lately there's been some progress on that. But if you compare it with DARPA, for example, it's kind of obvious. It's a no-brainer. There's a big difference. Another example of a bureaucratic rule is the insistence on collaboration. And personally, I'm very much against it. And the collaborations can be very fruitful, of course. It can be extremely useful, but spreading the money, sprinkling the money over many teams, economics for the common good, or you can find it in the report, which, by the way, is on my website if you want to have a look at it. It's going to be obvious to you, but it's not obvious to most people I've talked to. You need to use independent high-level experts, of course. You need to pay attention to the supply side. Is there talent on the other side? Do you have are those people going to deliver in the end? You should not prejudge a solution. You should set objective. I already mentioned the vaccine case, and that's very important. We should be humble. We should not sprinkle the money. We should concentrate the money. We should evaluate, expose, disseminate, and have a sunset clause. So we need to stop projects. That's something in France, for example, we are very bad at. We need to stop the project when they don't work. I could give you anecdotes about this. If we can involve the private sector in risk-taking, that's great, because we may avoid some white elephants and so on and so forth. So these are common sense things, but they are not necessarily applied. Implications, just you have to reallocate funds to disruptive innovation. You scale down those two programs, those two small programs. You're not going to get much money out of that, but still you should do it. We don't quite know what they are doing, honestly, but you may have better information than I do about this. You can finance it equity stake, but is that disruptive research money which should be financing equity stakes in small firms which are in ITRL situations? No, that doesn't make any sense. So you should focus on low TRLs, technology readiness levels activities, and reform the governance of the ERC. So more powers to prominent scientists, just like you have with the ERC, more program managers, independently highly qualified, with greater discretion, and of course simplify the application process, and various other recommendations that we have in the report. And I think this reform, if it's done, will of course meet a lot of resistance, but will be doable if we have the political will. And here, I'm being asked sometimes, can we do DARPA in Europe? I say yes. I mean, why not? We have done it. We have done it with the ERC. It's a success story, but it's just a matter of political will. And what we have to do is to evangelize. And I know people in this room, of course, are contributing to that. We have to evangelize good governance, and then try to escape the big technology trap by supporting game-changing innovation. That seems very important. So let me stop here. I don't know if you have some time, but I would be pleased to have some kind of interaction with you.
Thank you very much, Jean Tirole. Now, do you have one or two questions, please, for Jean Tirole? You can present you, please.
Manuel Heitor, many thanks for this very comprehensive. Actually, I've been reading your reports several times. Two very brief questions. You have clearly identified that the ARPA-type instruments rely on program managers, which in the United States, they came from the market and they are highly paid. The point is that how far within the European labor structure, we will be able to have a similar approach, because even the attempts in Germany and in Austria have not succeeded, and also now in the United Kingdom as well. So I would like, in terms of the traditional European labor approach, if we can have that as a consideration. My second question is the following. You very well pointed the independence of the board of the DRC, the European Research Council, and we have with us Jean-Pierre Vidal, has been absolutely critical to define new funding instruments and to distribute the money, because the remaining of the framework program, so 80%, has been essentially one way to distribute funds among member states. So the question is, how far we can leverage the experience of the independence of the European...
Those are very good questions, which means that I have trouble answering them. The amount of money which is involved, and we have to accept that if we are going to get top scientists, it's going to be very difficult, and we have to pay them. Of course, they don't do the job for just the money. But you have to give them some salary, and I know in Europe it's very difficult. So we really have to convince them to convince the politicians actually to do whatever it takes to get the right people. And I don't have any specific insight on how to do it, to be honest. It's a difficult thing. What we can do is some benchmarking, so try to get the numbers for the US. And as you know, for example, for DARPA, they are in their job for only a few years, 3 to 5 years, I believe. I mean, you probably know better than I do. And then, you have all those institutions which are kind of interesting, but not another way of doing things in Europe, where we have more kind of civil servant thing, which may make sense for certain jobs, but in the particular job here, I'm not sure it makes sense. We should leverage the experience of the ERC. That's, again, as you know, it's difficult because people want to distribute the chocolates. They want to be, I'm being simplistic here. And of course, I exaggerate a bit, but people want to distribute the chocolate, and they think that if people who are not even civil servants are in power, then there will be lots of abuse. Now, I would just say, look at DARPA, look at NSA, NSF, look at NIH. The track record has been extremely good. And I didn't see much corruption. I didn't see abuse in terms of contracts. I'm sure there have been crimes, but by and large, I'm sure there is no more crimes than in Europe. So the comparison with the US, I think, is very important, both in terms of the salaries, in terms of the experience. DRC is kind of unique, and because it's DRC. We also need some kind of oversight committee so as to make sure that bureaucracy is not taking over. I mean, the bureaucracy is everywhere, and the DRC has been very good at avoiding it, but still has some. And I don't know what Jean-Pierre will say about it, but it still has some. And some is necessary, of course, but the observatory, I don't want to recreate another organization, but something that makes sure that you have some simplification. And perhaps it already exists. I don't want to. Sorry, I don't really have all of that to say. I don't have a good answer to your questions.
The last question for Jean-Tirole. Last question? Okay. Thank you so much, Jean-Tirole.
Thank you so much. Thanks for inviting me.
We invite the speaker for the table 2 to join us.
Okay, good. So let's open with the second roundtable, and it's really directed towards trying to bring together some recommendations. We know we're at an important phase where the design of the future programs is likely to be influenced and certainly set in the roadmaps of the future Commission. And so this is an opportunity to bring our voice out on this subject. I think we're missing André. André is the head of JEDI, the Joint European Disruption Initiative. I know he's supposed to be on his way from Paris. I thought I'd start this roundtable first of all welcoming Maureen Clerc from who's the director of INRIA, Sophia Antipolis, Jane Holbeck Nielsen from the University of Denmark, the TU Denmark, and head of the physics department, and Antoine Petit, the director general of CNRS. I'd like to start by asking you maybe for reactions to Jean Tirol's comments
of basic science, strategic science, becoming innovations and value in society. And I think we should be careful to dare to think long and think basic. So I think this was very clearly stated, and I really appreciate that it was backed by economic research as well. So just a first reaction.
Yeah, more deeper science, please.
So some of the thoughts that resonated with me are about daring to take risks and the problems that you can have when you have to stop a venture. It's hard to find maybe a new place on the job market, and that projects we should be able to stop projects when they're not working. So this agility seems important points for me.
That's in the roadmap of INRIA. It has been in the constitution of INRIA for a long time as well, to have time-bound projects, but it's not universal.
It's not always easy to stop them, though.
Yes, for me the key point is the fact that Jean recalls that the expenses of private R&D in Europe are not sufficient. It's true in France, it's true in Europe, but we cannot force industry to invest. When you see the figures concerning Alphabet or Meta or Apple, nobody forces them to invest. So how can we encourage them to invest? And what are the relations we can imagine between academic and industry to really think together to the reindustrialization? I think that's a key point. And for me, I'm convinced that fundamental research is key. Of course, we're all convinced, but something on which I would like to insist, the fact that for me, fundamental research is not equivalent to curiosity-driven objective. You can have really goal-oriented fundamental research, which will be of more interest for industry. And for instance, if I look at what we try to do at CNRS, in CNRS we do only one thing, it's basic research or fundamental research. Nevertheless, now we have almost 300 joint labs with industry, in which we still do fundamental research, but on questions that have been co-defined with industrial partners. And for me, that's something we should really push at European level. With probably a warning is the fact that we all know that except at ERC, the European Commission likes big consortia, and in some cases the right way is to have one academic lab, one industrial partner, and to help them to develop formulation. So it's really something that I think we should think about it.
Thanks. Yeah, I think, well, there's one question that comes to mind. I don't want to be a nerdy statistician here, but if the three largest R&D spenders are low R&D to sales companies, they're car manufacturers versus software companies, maybe we also lack large-scale big spenders who are rich enough to really move the needle on software. André, welcome. Thank you. Just on time. And well, so this one will give you a chance to jump in. I thought I'd dive into one of the points that Jean-Pierre made, which made everybody laugh. So I think it's one of the famous subjects around the cooperation and the famous labs from one lab from here and one lab from there, and 3 companies and 2 SMEs and so on. I think a question around how can we evolve these rules, which we in Europe have lived with for the past 25 years, and everybody agrees that they've probably outlived their usefulness. How can we move towards indeed cooperation, because that's one of the benefits of collaborative research, but at the same time bulk up a bit more towards bigger moonshots, towards driving, funding, and initiating projects that can achieve bigger outcomes. So,
as you wish. So hello everybody, sorry for being a bit delayed. Well, I think Jean-Pierre just asked, can we do an ARPA? That's what I understand from what he said. Well, first, yes, we first must, because it's not business as usual. It's not business as usual in Europe, because, and I don't want to, please don't shoot the messenger, we basically lost our position technological-wise in any single sector in the last 20 years. You probably saw the beautiful launch of Starship last week. Last year, SpaceX launched 97 rockets, the Europeans 3. NVIDIA has now 80% market share on AI accelerators. On AI, well, Mistral is very heroic. I was with Arthur Mensch yesterday to try to compete with the big platforms, but I think it's going to be hard. So what we need to do is obviously to invent the next big thing and to leapfrog. And it's pretty striking to see that Microsoft, with 10 billion bet in OpenAI, created, and sorry to make some finance here, more than 1,000 billion in market capitalization since 2 years. Microsoft is now worse than the whole French stock market. NVIDIA is worth more than the whole German stock market. So we can talk how great research we have, how fantastic we are in Europe. I think it's code red. And doing business as usual, especially in this country, which had some kind of a political trauma since 3 days, is not possible anymore. And I'm going to make a second reference, and I would have much more points, but I want to have the debate. Jean-Pierre did not try to change an existing institution. He created Toulouse School of Economics. So I don't think it makes sense to try to transform existing institutions. 500 years ago, Machiavelli said, don't try to change institutions, create new ones next to them. And at that time, if you remember, it was a dictatorship. He had a prince, and he could do whatever he wanted. So even if we have a strong president, he cannot do what he wants. Even if we have a strong president of the commission, she cannot do what she wants. So I think it's also time to really think on research and technology about new institutions. I mean, I think Antoine is very heroic trying to transform CNRS, and I hope and I know he will succeed. But I think it's tough. I think we need to put 90% of our money into existing institutions, and we need to create new ones that a bit like Mandela would say, either you try new institutions and at least they will put pressure on the existing ones, or the new institutions will succeed and everybody will be happy. So in both cases, we will win. And I think this capacity of being bold, and that's my personal conclusion, we have entered this world of big bets. We have lost the capacity in Europe to make big bets. Where is the Kennedy saying to 40,000 people, this is everywhere? So I'm calling for really much bolder thinking, and we cannot just ask for 10% more in Framework Program 11. That's not going to make it. We need a real revolution here.
Thanks, Andre. I think Jenny wanted to react.
It's a tough job to react to such bold statements, but very inspiring what I'm hearing also is the boldness, the daring not to do what we used to do. I do think we just heard before that there was a proposal for 2.5 times more funding for the ERC, so I thought that was a rather bold statement. So, but I think perhaps daring not to spread things out. We heard the chocolate term just before. So daring to create hotspots, perhaps in Europe. It goes a little bit against our, it doesn't feel as nice that we don't include everybody and everything, but I do think we have to dare to choose areas where we want to be strong. This electronics, quantum technology, devices, an area we want to focus on. It's not an area where we are strong today, but this could be something we should. We heard the quantum valley just before, but we cannot expect that everybody will be involved in all the areas that we have competencies in. And that is, it's always nice to mention areas where we want to be strong, but it's also about closing projects, saying we cannot compete, we cannot be number 1 to 5 in these areas. So that's the tough part of it, to prioritize and dare to create hotspots, maybe even geographically in Europe. So that's perhaps my comment.
Maureen?
Well, regarding breakthroughs, sometimes it's hard to define in advance where a breakthrough will come from. So that's why research as excellence is a foundation, and it has to be strong in all our member states. But for having the right environment, so that Europe is developing. For example, for data spaces are very interesting because they're common. They're a common property of the European Union, and we will be able to see things emerge thanks to this interoperability of data spaces.
So of course I agree that we should do choice, but we should do choice at European level, clearly. And if I look at France, it's, if I can say, it's funny to hear that we will be one of the major countries in AI, in quantum cosmology, in hydrogen, in battery. France is a fantastic country, but not so big. So we cannot imagine to be such a good country in all these different fields. Perhaps we can be a good country in some niche inside these fields. But I really think we should have a strong impression at European level to decide collectively what should be our choices. And perhaps I disagree with André, because André is still young, so he thinks that he can transform the world. I am much older, so I have a few years which remains to me. I more believe that we should transform to create new things, because I'm not sure that we are able to create new things, but that's a discussion we get after. And we had, it has been said already, but we have a fantastic example with ERC, which should maintain and develop ERC. But perhaps we should also, if we consider that there are some gaps in the European Commission programs, to try to use the experience of ERC to create new programs. And ERC is not big consortia. It's one PI with synergy is 2 or 3. I think that if we want to develop, because it's really the key point, to develop interaction between academy and industry, we have to find the appropriate mechanisms to help the transfer. But also, if I say transfer, it seems to be unilateral. And from our experience with companies, the key point is relations between the company and us, to, as I said before, to try to find the subject of interest for our researchers, because we all know researchers, you can never force an academic researcher to do what he or she doesn't want to do, so you have to interest him or her by subject. But on the contrary, if the subject comes from industry and or of interest, of scientific interest, then they're really very happy to study them. So I think we should invent, so perhaps it's new, but even new tools which will help, and perhaps which will push private sector to invest more in R&D, because as we said from the very beginning, if R&D sector does not invest more, even if there is a strong effort from the public side, we will reach, if I go to France, we will reach we'll go from 2.2 to 2.4 or 2.5, but we will never reach 3. So that's for me the key point.
Totally agree with what Antoine just said, and maybe this is of interest we're going to release in a couple of weeks a ranking of the big philanthropies in Europe, putting money into science and technology. And we compare to what the global level is. And people will tell me that, luckily Antoine and we are friends, I'm not Vogue at all, I'm actually pretty anti-Vogues, but you just essentialized me, as the Vogue people said, as being the young guy, which is thank you very much. I was just 3 weeks away with John and Ander. Maybe it's a name that people don't know, but John Durr is the founder of Kleiner Perkins, one of the most successful VC funds in the Silicon Valley. Forbes says that they have 10 billion net assets. They just gave 2022, 18 months ago, 1.2 billion to Stanford to create the Durr Stanford School of Sustainability, considering that Stanford is not doing enough on sustainability. Where are the Europeans? Where are the Europeans? And the richest man is not in the US, he's here. I'm not criticizing because I'm not giving that amount of money to science, but I think it's our collective work to positively try to get more philanthropy, because as you said, Antoine, I mean, the coffers of the states, the direction is not looking good for the next years. So there needs to be civil society stepping in. But in order to have civil society stepping in, I think we also need to adapt our structures. And ERC is celebrated. I'm so happy to see Jean-Pierre, and I know Mario Lepton is doing an incredible work. But the rest of the Horizon program, and sorry, maybe it's because I'm independent that I'm allowing myself to say that, when are we going to stop to mix redistribution, which is a fair, legitimate political goal, and excellence? I mean, there are great mathematicians in the room, you know, when you try to optimize two parameters, very often you actually are under-optimal in the total. And I think we need to separate the two. We probably need to do Horizon completely like the ERC, that only on excellence. But when will a French president or a French minister of research accept that they put 20%? This criteria of saying, oh, we put 15% and we only get 10%, I think is toxic. What we should do as Europe is see Europe as a whole progressing on the rankings, and that is not doing well. And on the new structures, I mean, look at history in the last 30, 40 years. It's not the existing structures that have created a radical disruption. And secondly, we also see that at one point when a structure is too big, it becomes bureaucratic despite all the good efforts of everybody. So I believe Europe that has learned to live with 27 countries is actually not playing its strengths. Is how do we play with smaller structures that work as an ecosystem and not one centralized instrument? And last but not least, can somebody also say that and I see Mr. Heitor here, that how many percent is going out of the 95 billion of your Horizon Europe into consultants? We made it so complicated to apply to grants that my understanding from the Court of Auditors in Luxembourg is that it's between 10 and 15% of that money that goes to consultants because we made it so complicated. It's crazy. There should be 0 consultants in that. Are we able to be bold enough to make these applications much easier, but then in return to be much more demanding? When I see reports on Horizon, I always hear reports how much money we spend, how much project consortium were created, etc. But very little on what actually came out of it. And when you give 77 billion or 95 billion for the last program, there's always good things coming out. But is that the right societal return on investment? I think we need to be much more demanding on what comes out. And I think good scientists, I think there is my last point would be between mercantilization and total academic freedom, I think the great scientists, you also motivate them but I speak under your control, by asking the hard problems. I think you motivate great people by asking the right questions. And I think that is something where probably we need I don't know, do we need some kind of foresight where we have both public and scientists trying to identify what are the current challenges of our society and focus a little bit of the research money on these bold societal problems.
If I may, I think something we also should assume is the fact that science is a very elitist activity. And the European level, as the European Commission, should not be there to fund all research labs all over Europe. If I take a sportive metaphor, then everybody can play soccer, but a few of people will be professional. Few of them will play in Division 1 or First League, what you want, and even few of them play Champions League. And I think the European Commission should fund only people who have the objective to play in the Champions League, which means that they can be there. Of course, they can have very smart scientists everywhere, but everybody is not very good everywhere. And that's true at the European level, that's true, to be frank, at the French level also. Sometimes people ask me, oh, but CNRS is not present in this region. I say, no, they are not present because they are not good. Okay? As you can imagine, I have some trouble. But it's the role of CNRS in France to find the best and to help them to be even better at the international level. And I think that the European Commission, which in fact represents a small amount of money in the whole money spent in Europe, so the role of Europe, of this framework program, should be that. But I can understand that some people can disagree with me.
Maybe if we can shift to one, it's very linked to what we just said, but we talked about, I would call it demand, and growing the effort for research and technology. There's one theme that came through in many of the interventions, is the attractiveness. The attractiveness in two ways: attractiveness for others to come and do R&D in Europe, and I think some of it came through, and also, of course, attractiveness to get the best students, to make sure that the best students embrace careers in science and technology, be it fundamental or applied. And I think that's come through. I think it's what increasing budgets by a factor of 2, 5, or 10 will immediately raise the question of how do we get the right people in there. And I'd love to have your thoughts on that.
Yes, for attractiveness, the Marie Skłodowska-Curie actions are very important to support. Training networks, doctoral training networks are very supportive. It's sometimes difficult to manage to hire at the same time 15 doctoral students on the similar topics in Europe. So sometimes we find that the quality of the students that we manage to hire in the doctoral training are not as good as we may have if we could have them maybe less, hire less than 15. You know, having maybe projects that are not always huge size, but and of course the ERC also is important for attractiveness, not only for the 100,000 PhD students who joined the ERC since the beginning, but also for having PIs coming from other countries, even outside of Europe, who are attracted by the ERC. So.
Well, I think it's an enormous challenge to attract the best and on a global scale. We need excellent universities. The Eurotech Union, I think, is important in this connection. But we also need that, I think we had a discussion earlier about that the students kind of had to, PhDs, postdocs, chose, do I go academic or do I go industry? I think we should see if we can soften that a little bit so that you don't take the choice of your life there, but you can actually go back and forth. I think that's important for the young generation today, to not be definite in your decision making, so that you go to industry, and there has to be industry around, back to having private companies in Europe that are high tech and not mid-tech. I think this is really, and that was the question I was left with after the talk and the reading. How do we attract more of these high-tech companies to Europe? That will be an attractive force, I think, for young people as well, that there are jobs out there. If there are excellent universities, there are also jobs, and if we can even make it go back and forth a few times, then this is also attractive in itself. I have one rare example in my department of a professor coming from industry, coming from a research-heavy industry to a professorship and a center of excellence. He is rare in many ways, but very, very talented, but has done that transition from industry to university. And in our university, this is quite rare. We would like to have more of those going back and forth, but it's difficult, and I think it's back to how we evaluate in universities, that we have this counting method often, too often. I think we should look more into, at least at technical universities, that it is healthy and quality to be in a different path for a while. I think this could be attractive for students and for workforce as well.
Well, clearly attractivity is a key point now to attract and to retain the scientists in a competition which is worldwide with more and more actors. 20 years ago, 30 years ago, nobody could think to go to Singapore or to the Middle East. Now, as we all know, they are very good scientists. But I think that Europe has a lot of assets. And I think that Europe should develop a program to welcome people from outside Europe who like to come back in Europe. And perhaps it's a joke, we should support Trump. Then a lot of American scientists would take the opportunity to come back. I agree that it's a bit risky, so it was a joke. But no, more seriously, I think really we could have a program in Europe to attract people from outside Europe, because we all know that the quality of life is Europe is important. We also should develop research and practice. There are a lot of domains in which research and practitioners are absolutely key. We all know the particle physics CERN in Switzerland, Geneva, and clearly it's a factor of attractivity which is absolutely crucial. So that's very important. And after that, there is also, don't forget it, the question of salaries, of welcome package, and there is also a competition inside Europe between countries. But we really should invest on talents, and to attract talents, you have to put some money on the table of different ways, without forgetting that a scientist, and Jean-Pierre says it this way, what does he or she want? She wants to collaborate with the best scientist, or like him or like her. So it's not so complicated to have critical mass if we organize us for that.
And I would agree with Antoine. I was about to say, I was surprised that the scientific community was not more involved in the European discussions on migration. I mean, obviously we need a much more targeted green card style of program. I don't think we used actually the first Trump presidency to its full potential to attract people. There was a bit President Macron's Make Our Planet Great Again program, but I think we need to scale that and to be a little bit more consistent long-term and not just doing a communication whiz. And I think it's something that also our society can probably hear. We know how much immigration topic has become so divisive, but when we bring a little bit rationality, I think everybody can understand that. The second thing on the infrastructure, I mean, we always think about particle physics, and you're totally right, but right now, the main issue on AI, for AI scientists, is that you have a lot of small AI companies that are all pay massive amounts of money to train their models. So that could be also thinking. When I see that still a lot of next generation Europe money is going into bridges and canals, that is old thinking. Sorry, it's important, but and that the Italians, sorry for the Italians, in the room want to build a bridge over the Messina Strait. I mean, because they don't know how to spend the money otherwise. I mean, do something like a cloud weave, which is currently emerging as a competition to Amazon to train your models. So this is something where probably big money needs to go. On fusion, there's a huge issue for most of the startups or the researchers in this world to have access to the fuel, to tritium. Can we open up ITER to collaborate more as an ecosystem? Because this infrastructure, we put already 20 billion collectively into that. So I think there's a lot of, I think we need to get more strategy in the way research can inform, and again, also to think about what are the topics of tomorrow. Just to give you an idea, out of the, and I'm not coming from the startup world, but it's always interesting to see what the tip of the iceberg. From 32 very science-driven startups in fusion, 29 are in the US. Is it the US who has an energy problem? No, it's Europe. How come we have not much more boldness on that? And I think their infrastructure plays a role. And last, salaries, sorry to say, this is, so it's philanthropy, it's getting our budgets in order, but here again, do you have any idea what is the average salary of a PhD working at OpenAI? Average age 25 years old. $900,000. So yes, the quality of life in Paris is fantastic, but we have very strong competition against us. So just increasing by a few €100, which is a laudable cause of our minister, is not going to make the cut. And probably here also we need to accept that we cannot have a unified system. Justice is not the same thing as equality, but that's something we need to explain.
Could I react on what you said about strategy and AI research in Europe, research and innovation? Certainly the establishment of an AI office is a very good initiative, and it goes for coordination. It will allow more coordination because AI has been sprinkled in many different pillars and different actions, and we need a global view. Also, in digital science and technology, it's a matter of having an integrated view, a holistic view also, because you can't really separate cloud from quantum, from all these things and look at them in isolation, because innovation will perhaps come from the combination of techniques. So having coordination structures that allow to have a big picture is important.
Very iconoclastic idea. We will have elections in France and the UK. We unfortunately just had them in Europe, so it's too late. Do you know how many heads of states are scientists in the 27 EU countries? One. You could add that there is also somebody, I think, who's a mathematical teacher in secondary, but there's only one, and both of them are, by the way, in Eastern European countries. So it's also up to us and to the scientists, and I don't include myself in that, to also get involved in the political life, because otherwise, or at least work to make sure.
Really low now. We've had some grand suggestions in a larger system, but I think the ERC and the PO, so the ERC projects with the proof of concept means that the idea of relatively easily funding impact-related activities related to excellent science. This is a good concept. Let's do some more of that. Let's make it automatic, perhaps. You make a click. Do you want POC funding as well? From the beginning, so that you start thinking about innovation not in the beginning of the project and not when you're almost done. Should we make that bigger? Should we make it also so now it's more technology oriented? Perhaps society impact. Make more engineers and scientists that think impact in society. Back to your point about involvement in society, right? So let's learn from the success of the ERC and the POC, maybe broaden that out either in the volume or number or scale. This could be something to
Well, just maybe one. Having less constraints on European projects, because Europe has been trying to promote better social values and better ethical values and better everything, but having everything in each project as mandatory and very it makes project writing a little bit too time consuming. So maybe it should be monitored in another way and with other incentives.
Okay, if I may too. First one, don't restrict fundamental research to ERC and Pillar 1. I really think we need fundamental research in all pillars. That's the first point. And the second point is don't forget that research are done essentially by men and women and not by big theoretical consortia, which does not mean that they don't have to collaborate, but let them choose with whom they want to collaborate.
I'll also take two. One is separate strictly the ecosystem building, the redistribution, what the space industry call the geo-return. It's very important that we advance as a union and make all the rest, which is scientifically driven, ERC-like. But don't try to mix the two objectives. That's point number one. And point number two, have the bold, I will always remember that when we created JEDI, we went to see the former Director General of DG RTD, and he said, oh, that is a fantastic idea. Let us do it ourselves. No, I don't think today bureaucratic institutions are capable of boldness, speed, agility, which we need. So put 10%, 5%, 1% into structures which are not controlled by the financial engagement rules of the Commission. Otherwise, they will be killed. The DARPA director told me, you would recreate DARPA today without the myth of GPS and internet, and it would be killed by the administration. So have the courage to do it as a foundation, as an outside. And again, it will either at least put the pressure on the rest, 99% of the funding, or even succeed. So I think in both cases, there's no risk to do it.
Thank you very much. Now, we can do it. Yes. But before leaving, I propose a question with the public.
So the question is a remark. Andre, you know that I share most of your ideas. I would like to introduce a nuance on the idea that one necessarily has to create new institutions. I perfectly understand what you mean. I mean, at the beginning of President Macron's first term, we dreamed that there should be a very efficient DARPA at the European level. It appeared to be impossible. Then the French-German initiative could take place. We quickly understood it was not feasible. Finally, that we should do something in France for innovation. Well, that was not that satisfactory. And indeed, you are right to create JEDI. Nevertheless, as far as higher, I mean, one has to have a basis of higher education and research institutions. And two arguments. First, create new institutions. We've done it in France so much. Medieval universities teach Aristoteles. One creates the Collège de France. 18th century universities are unable to train the technical elites. We create grandes écoles. We lose 2 wars against the Germans, and we need research. And the universities are unable to do research. We create CNRS. But if we create CNRS, now how many research institutes are there in France? Maybe 17, is that right, or something like that? So we never stop to create. So we've done it too much. We better group and sometimes try to have agile institutions and efficient institutions. Second argument. I've chaired an institution 3 times. First time it was a new institution. It was somewhat efficient, but not that much. The 2 other times, I mean, you had the École Normale Supérieure, you had the Collège de France, and Mines Paris-Tech and Dauphine, and you would have left these old glories sleeping next to each other. No, I mean, you cannot throw away such a treasure. And now at the École Polytechnique and the other schools of IP Paris, we have a responsibility to transform these institutions. And Antoine does have a responsibility to transform CNRS, and he knows that, because that's not much money, that's only 3.6 billion euros budget. Well, but that's already something. So let us potentialize and focus our institutions as well. So that's rather a compliment than a contradiction.
Thank you. Thierry Coulon, who wants to have an answer? JEDI?
I fully agree, and I didn't say you need to dismantle. I think you need to do things in parallel. And by the way, all the creations you mentioned are great successes. So why stop?
But at some point, no, they are too spread out. Yeah, and now you have to.
I think we should do both. I think we're in a world where we need to experiment. If we don't experiment, then we are sure that we're going to cross.
We have a second question. Could you present you?
Manuel Heitor, thank you so much for this discussion, and Andrea for your insights in such a disruptive view. The question is, we may among ourselves agree in almost everything that we have said. The point is that under the complex European decision-making process, where decisions are essentially co-decisions between the European Parliament, the Member States, with a very strong role, and the Commission, how do you see disruptive changes such as those that you propose to be, for example, discussed at the national and at the European level? Because we know that we are facing an increased polarization of our societies with new movements, and although until now very limited, but some of them are anti-science. So how do you translate your thought to the real political issue that we are facing in many countries, including this one, but certainly Europe-wide?
If I had the answer, I would have run for European Parliament, and I'm not a politician at all, but I think a lot of people live in the illusion. And I've came to the conclusion, which sounds very counterintuitive, that what is worse than not doing is to thinking you do the right thing. You keep hearing here in this country that we are great technological leaders. This is, I don't know in which world they're working. I was just an hour ago with Thierry Breton, sorry, with a lot of respect for him. He's living in a different world. And it's not to be negative. It's just to have the sense of urgency, which I don't think we have. And point number two, I think a lot of these anti-science parties could be potentially, that's tactics, brought by the fact that you don't come with this idea which too often is we need more budget, and I fully am for more budget. More budget is always better than less. But probably instilling this idea that we could do more with the existing one could be something where we win people which normally are not necessarily in favor of putting more money. Bridging the gap between the north and the south of Europe right now. And third point, a lot of countries are worried to lose the money that goes back to them. If the program of redistribution is clearly assumed, assumé in French, is clearly stated, I think it's going to be less the game of who is winning and getting the consortia. Maybe I'm a bit idealistic, but if you are straightforward on the redistribution, if you're straightforward on the fact, and if the big countries who are the big receivers start first to say, okay, if the best project is not French, then we are okay to put the center of excellence for quantum in, I don't know, in Munich or in Torino or in Copenhagen, of course. but I have not heard a lot of, you know, we talk Europe and we talk French tech. It's great French tech, but it's fragmenting the market. Again, so these would be my 3 points. I think there is a way to do it with the existing budget. Thierry mentioned, I think you mentioned France 2030. France 2030 is figured about anything disruptive coming out. So the money is there.
Thanks. André Pietri from...
In the sense that if, as the head of CNRS, I say science is important, fundamental research is important, people say, okay, you're just doing that. So if Patrick Kane, the head of Thales, or Pouyanné, the head of Total Energy, or Florent Bédégo, the head of Michelin, says, you know, we have 10 labs, each of them is of the three, we have 10 joint labs with us. Okay, that it makes much more power, because decision maker and politician will probably pay more attention to that. So we have to do our job is to push the research, but what we have to do perhaps before all is to find sponsors, not from our world, that will say also that science is important.
Thank you. Last remarks from Plamena Markova.
Thank you very much. So from EMBL, in fact, and thank you for the discussion, which was very thought-provocative and very provocative as well, which is always very good. My question, and I agree with most of it, I have to say, maybe my question goes to the one point that I'm not fully convinced, because in one breath we say we need European excellence, which I think we all agree on in all sectors. In the same one, we talk about how it could be distributed in different countries and how it should be accepted that it's distributed. And yet, I get the impression that we still talk about Western European excellence. In the same breath, we say that we should invest in facilitating the green cards and the visa regimes. And I just wonder, should we not consider whether we are enabling excellence from other parts of Europe before we consider if we enable green cards or something? So I just want to put this in the conversation, because we still need to decide or maybe think a bit more about what really the next framework program and how should fund, not forgetting that Europe indeed has a lot of talent that may be facing obstacles to show itself.
One answer?
Yeah, I agree. To be wonderful to have talents being trained in all of Europe and Eastern Europe. In fact, in my lab, we have a lot of trouble to hire people in computer vision, and all the applications we have come from China. So it would be wonderful to have people trained in computer vision and AI, etc., come from Europe, and we would have less trouble hiring them, right? So I think we should have decided at the European level in which fields we need to train. I think it's part of the next strategy. Massively people in strategic fields in which we need sovereignty.
It's a very nice music to conclude this table. Thank you very much. So now we welcome a special guest from the European Council, Jean-Pierre Vidal. Jean-Pierre Vidal is in the cabinet of the President of the European Council. So let's now talk about the view of the European Council with Jean-Pierre Vidal.
For implementation. So there was a lot of food for thought, and also a lot of, to make it happen. So the role of the European Council is extremely important for the setting of the agenda of the Union. It frames, in fact, what the Commission program will be down the road, and then the Commission program will, of course, then be implemented in the Union policies. There is something, I think, that is quite important in the new strategic agenda, as is currently being discussed by leaders, and it's in preparation. They will discuss, the leaders themselves will discuss it and adopt it at the end of the month, as I think was said earlier, is, in fact, the change in the global landscape compared to what the global landscape was, in fact, 5 years ago. This new geopolitical landscape is characterized by geopolitical competition. It's characterized by challenges to the multilateral global order as Europe would like to see it. It's also a war that has been affected by many crises over the past 5 years. And in fact, I mean, that was not, I would say, crises I never expected, but they were kind of surprising, and in particular, in the strengths, or let's say the impact of the crisis for Europe itself. Because some of these crises, I mean, have affected other parts of the world differently. Right? And in particular, if you take the energy crisis, the impact on Europe is not quite the same as the impact on the US, for example. The US is energy rich, we are energy poor. I mean fossil energy, of course. We have had the pandemic, and we have had now, I mean, since 2022, a security crisis with the war that is at our border. So, it has very much changed the mindset, I think, and the nature of the political discussion at European level, with a lot more importance on issues like strategic autonomy, sovereignty, that morphed into sovereignty actually, over 2 years, industrial policy, economic resilience, and so on and so forth. And in that, also the awareness of the gaps that the Union has in terms of technology. Right? And that's, I mean, it has been well illustrated, I mean, by many presenters today, including some striking figures, I must say, in the presentation by Professor Thior. So this means that, in fact, one of the key themes that, according to my perception, will emerge for the new strategic agenda is essentially security and defense. That, in fact, will also structure somewhat the other priority, including competitiveness and what has to be done with the economy, research, innovation. Why? Because if you want to have an impact in the world, you need a vibrant economy, you need a strong economy, right? You need an economic base, a strong economic base, otherwise there is no possibility to project even your own values outside. So this is what we want for the Union. We want a strong economic base, and what we observe is that we have technological gaps, and we have a number of weaknesses like lack of fossil energy. And the good news there is that during the previous institutional cycle, the political work that has been delivered, in fact, is the long-term objectives. So long-term objective is essentially the Green Deal and the digital agenda. But I also do think it cannot be without the public sector. So what will be very important, and also when you talk at European level, is the budget will actually be rediscussed with the next programming will already be in the table for discussion as of next year. I mean, it will be a difficult exercise, right? I mean, a very difficult exercise. The Union budget actually is not that big. It's 1% of GNI. It's very little. I mean, the part of our research is even smaller. So we cannot hope, I would say, that it will suddenly become the size of the US budget. So we have to be smart in how we use it the best we can, and it's merged, in fact, with private money. in particular for the risking. There are many institutions that we have. We have the European Investment Bank that is also active there. So there will be an exercise to be done at the stage of implementation about how to provide, in fact, the private sector with the necessary, or let's say the adequate financing tool. I think it will always be a kind of blending financing between the public sector and the private sector in Europe. Also because we don't necessarily have, in fact, the same economic basis as was mentioned. I mean, the size of the company in the US and the access to funding is completely different. It might change over time in Europe, but at the beginning, I mean, I think there will be a need for some seeds from our public budget. So, I mean, therefore, I'm also thinking that maybe I will conclude on that and then leave some time for questions. I think it's very important, in fact, this kind of event and symposium where you address the issue of the conclave report, I mean, when you push this agenda forward. Because as you rightly observed, some of you observed, in fact, I mean, politicians need to be made aware, in fact, of the issues, and it has to translate also, in particular at European level, it's extremely difficult because these issues have to translate into a political message that is also understandable by actually 27 member states, 27 member state representatives. And it's true also sometimes that the way we work is not the way we should work. And de facto, it's based on the way the union is constructed and the size of this budget that is pretty small. That of course, when the budgetary discussions are going on in Brussels on the multi-annual financial framework, one of the key aspects that member states always look at is how much do I give, how much do I get back? I mean, and it's normal, in fact, in a sense, because it's in the DNA, in fact, of the negotiators themselves. Like, they have to defend their own budget. So you really need to build a strong case, actually, for, I mean, the need for excellence, the need to make it at European level, the spillover effects that it can have also from one country to the next and these kind of things. It's extremely important to build up this case because the fallback is always my budget, how much do I give, how much do I get back. Having said that, when you look at what we have done with Next Generation EU, in fact, it's quite remarkable because this was a program that is extremely redistributive. I mean, and ex ante, I mean, because there is the ex post ex ante, we can always criticize ex post, you know, we do too much of this, we should have done that, and so on and so forth. But one should not underestimate that the first task was actually, I mean, to save us from a possible financial crisis and to remain together and to prove that we can work together and be big also together. So, I mean, there are some hopes there. But the political discussion, I think, will continue to be difficult. We have to build the case, in fact, for European instruments, more European instruments, and to build this case not only in Brussels, but also at national level. You know, it's always at national level, and very often, I must say, the way actually some countries, and I will not like to name countries, but when a case is being built, and you say a case is sold to other member states that we should go in one direction, it should also be, let's say, in a way that is seen as beneficial for all, right? It's very important. It's also very important that the national position, I think, also factor in a lot more, in fact, the global interest of the Union as such, because, in fact, to be honest, I think given the changes that we have ahead of us, it's together that we will find a solution. I don't see any member state alone being able to navigate the world in which we will be, you know, in the coming decades. So, on this, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Do you have one question? No? Could you present you, please?
Anna van Cuberta, President-elect from EPFL. I have a question on this moving to defense research, and it's a multi-component question. So what are the sectors that are considered? Because defense can be considered many. You can do missiles or you can do other things. How this will affect the open science policy? How it will affect the circulation of people? Can we hire anybody? And what industry will it fit in?
Okay. I mean, these are excellent questions, but that's, from my perspective, already questions. I mean, there are a number of sectors, of course, I mean, that are typically could be highlighted when you talk about defense. I mean, it's of course, I mean, a very difficult debate, not least because among member states, there are states that are neutral. So, in fact, already for them, it's kind of hard to swallow. And the second thing is that it will have implications, certainly, at the implementation stage. I mean, it's true that, yeah, I mean, that's my gut feeling. I would say yes, it will have implications. How, to which extent, that's another question, but I'm sure that in each member state, if you go, I mean, it depends which goods, I mean, you are talking about, because in fact, that's why I think defense can be kind of a structural element for research and innovation, is that in defense, I mean, there are many things that are being involved. In fact, most of them are dual use, or can be dual use, I mean, apart from the very little ones, right? And then usually, I mean, they are very regulated, and in fact, actually, nation states still like to control them very much. But there is a lot of, there are many technologies that are completely dual use, including those that relate, for example, to cybersecurity. I think they are dual use. I mean, they have military and civil application and so on and so forth. So it's a very wide range, and also it's also something where you can also do, I mean, also fundamental research, essentially. So I think there are many possibilities. And now it's obvious that this geopolitical landscape, as we see it evolving in front of us on a daily basis, has implication on what you can do, what you cannot do. I mean, even particularly if you want to, for example, I'm sure that if you want to hire somebody that is currently working in Moscow, in some research institute in Moscow, you probably have some limitation, right? It's already the case, in fact, by and large.
Short question.
Very quickly, I want to discuss with Anand. Here, you know, we in Institut Polytechnique de Paris, two of our schools are under the Ministry of Defense. And we do think that it's possible to perform research at the international standards with circulation and so on, and to have connection with research in defense. By the way, we have an interdisciplinary center on defense and security, and the Ministry of Defense is going to implement here the open part on the AI Defense Agency. But it's open. Of course, we cannot do classified research, that's clear, but they do it elsewhere. So it will be complicated, but it's an opportunity for us. It's necessary for geopolitical reasons, and I think we can cope, but indeed there will be many questions. We can discuss them.
Thank you, Thierry Collomb from Polytechnique and Guillaume Clossard from EuropaNova.
Jean-Pierre, is there a common understanding at the level of head of state and government that we might lose economic and technological ground very, very quickly? Because now we are at a momentum where China has the scientific leverage, and it was not the case 10 years ago. And when you discuss with Americans, the only idea they have in mind is how to accelerate. And how to accelerate. So how this dimension is going to be taken within the strategic agenda? How are we going to accelerate when you have China and the US who want to accelerate their confrontation, and we are in the middle? And we are already losing ground if we look back at the 10 last year.
I think, you know, the way, that's what I have observed, I mean, in the, let's say, the way European politics is done, is that the first thing, I mean, the basis for a great decision is to have a shared analysis. that they share the same analysis, they came to the conclusion that in fact the reality they face is the same. They understand the reality the same way. This is exactly what happened, for example, for the development of the decision on the recovery fund. Also, because if we have this message to the younger generation that we come up and saying, we are nowhere and so on, and we will be too slow. If you talk to people that are in their 20s and you tell them that, they say, okay, thank you, I've understood, but then I take a ticket and I go elsewhere, right? So, and we have assets. We have the basis, to be successful. There is no issue about it. So this is what we should be saying to them. We have the basis, we will do policy, and so go ahead.
Thank you very much. Jean-Pierre Vidal from European Council. Now we're very pleased to welcome another special guest, the former Minister of High Education, Science and Technology from Portugal. Portugal, where we have made the conclave report. Thank you very much, comes from Portugal. Manuel Heitor.
Thank you so much, and let me start by recognizing and acknowledging the invitation. Fine, yes. Thank you so much again for the invitation to be here, in particular to Thierry Coulon and to Jean-Pierre. A few weeks ago I received a message from Jean-Pierre that I should be here, and certainly when it keeps telling me something, I will follow his orders, and I'm particularly pleased to be here. As you know, I'm sharing a group of independent people to advise the Commission about the evolution of the framework program, and I would like to be very clear that everything I say here is my individual opinion. I do not represent the Commission at all, and certainly I will provide my own ideas and feedback, and today I learned a lot. But even before going that, and actually following Andre's suggestion, the most important is your active participation in this discussion in Europe. Certainly we will produce by October a report. There has been many other reports being produced, and it's important to have active voices, like certainly yours, and we are in a European leading institution, and so participate in this discussion, because we all need for this scientific activism. Based on this, I will try to conclude following Jean-Pierre Bourguignon's idea with three main issues or ideas for your own reflection and the discussion. And first and foremost, I would like to argue that we probably need to build a research and innovation union, one that really looks at how to join forces to think first on Europe and not just to distribute money among member states. Essentially, the several reflections which have been done here today about the weakness of the European Research Council comparing with the remaining of the program, we need to understand, and Jean-Pierre was one of those people, it took 7 years of discussion in Europe between 2001 and 2007 when the RC was created, and today we should be very proud of its uniqueness. But if we put together the European Research Council and more recently the European Innovation Council, they only account for about 22% of the overall framework program. And most of the framework programs, say about almost 80%, it's just one way to distribute money by member states. And that has been the way the most powerful member states found to have an equilibrium. So by building a research and innovation union, can we do at least evolve towards a different issue? And as you know, there is currently one major union in the energy field, created in 2015, particularly to face the issues of energy security in Europe. But for that to happen, we need to really create political ownership at the highest level of the European Council for research itself, and certainly to guarantee that when we join forces to think on Europe, we are promoting open and competitive excellence. We listen today a lot about TRLs and so forth. But let me bring also the idea together with this European Research and Innovation Union that more and more we need to look at the full research and innovation continuum and to, in my view, decrease this divide between low and high TRLs. And there are many evidence, even this school, and today in the morning I clearly look at some critical examples from advanced optical for new laser sources to quantum technology. But for instance, if you look at very recent European Innovation Council impact report for the last 2 years, 2022 and 2023, what it brings is new evidence in Europe that more than half of the startups funded through the EIC have been derived in a very short period of time, less than 2 years, from fundamental research funded through the ERC. We can also discuss this in terms, are we facing a new paradigm of science-innovation relationships? And as you know, in many academic sectors, it has been said that no, there is not a new paradigm, but we are in fact facing an accelerated rate of change between, say, innovation, disruptive innovation, and research. And this is an interesting for way many of us understand the value of research, but are bad news for Europe because most of our funding schemes are very slow scheme. Actually, earlier today, Thierry was arguing that the creation of some funding sources here took more than 3 years, and therefore, how far can we accelerate and go beyond the traditional things? And essentially, together with the building up of a true research and innovation union, how far can we have a transformative agenda for the coming framework programs, essentially to look at people, at the planet, but also at prosperity and peace. And I bring peace to this context because we know that the global competitors to Europe, particularly either the United States in particular, but China, are putting research and innovation for security and defense as a high level of priority. So can we analyze the framework program as for peace, people, planet, prosperity, and peace? And that is certainly an issue to be discussed. It can only be discussed at an European level. My second point is that we should be very clear that Europe at large and European citizens in particular have benefited a lot from the 40 years of the framework program. Some of you may remember, and Jean-Pierre, I'm sure he remembers, that exactly 20 years ago, when Philippe Pousquin set up an high-level group, the point by that time is the lack of researchers and scientists in Europe. Actually, the group shared in 2004 by José Maria Gago, by Paul Carro, and 10 years ago. The point is that, and I believe Jean-Pierre has already mentioned that this morning, the quality of the research jobs has not evolved at the same pace of the number of researchers. And this is a question which will require breakthroughs in our understanding, particularly because the quality of the research jobs and the quality of jobs in industry in general depend very much on labor and fiscal policy, which are national responsibilities and not European responsibility. And that this brings the need to really discuss a transformative agenda, in my view, for the framework program. Again, particularly based on 4 reasons: because of the added value of European research and innovation, and the last report of Horizon 2020 is very clear in terms of the number of jobs created in Europe, either in large companies or small companies. Second, by the increasing competition, and although we are always proud of European science, we need to understand the increasing competition. If you just look at the 1% of the most cited publications, Europe is in 3rd place these days. It has been 30 years ago in a different position. If you just look at the publications on AI, artificial intelligence, Europe accounts for 34%, but is decreasing its percentage. And if you look, for instance, at patent registration, we know that we are falling behind very much the United States and China these days. So the increasing competition at the world level should again allow us to bring forces together. But third, also the increasing societal challenge. We live in an aging society. The world population forecast is expected to show over 10 billion people in the 30 years to come. So if we really look at future generations in 30 years' time, tomorrow, the world population will be completely different from the world population today. And today, for example, for each European citizen, we have 2 African, but in 30 years' time, our children will face for each European 5 African, because most of the growth will be essentially in sub-Saharan Africa. And last but not least, the distinctive nature of European research and innovation, which is different and should complement the national programs, and in particular, the key issue which has already been addressed here. European overall investment in R&D is quasi-stagnant over the last 40 years, and please note that the evolution from 2022 to 2023 was a small decrease, not an increase. So we are more far away from the 2% target that we were 1 year ago, and exactly as Jean-Pierre mentioned, we know when we compare Europe with the United States, public expenditure is similar, is 0.7% of GDP, but the business expenditure in Europe is half of that on the United States. Forbes published yesterday a report on the largest world companies, and in the 30 largest companies, we have only 3 European, 2 of them being in the United Kingdom. So this question of building industrial competitiveness has become a key issue for Europe. So let me now move to my third and final point, which is this need towards a transformative agenda for the framework program. And I will go beyond the levels of budget, because it has become a commonplace in Europe that we need to double the budget. As you know, many members of the European Parliament has already said that. Also, 8 years ago, Lamy Pascal in his report also mentioned the need of doubling, and it did not happen. But 15 years ago, in the report then to move from FP7 to Horizon 2020, already the high-level group recommended the doubling, and it did not happen. So more than just discussing the doubling or not doubling, I will argue that why we need a strong framework program. And I believe we need to build a consensus in my view, under four specific topics. One is to strengthen in Europe competitive excellence. The lessons learned from the European Research Council on fundamental research, but more and more in the last 2 years from the European Innovation Council, we clearly understand that there is a minimum level, and it is, for instance, unacceptable, than the very large of unfunded proposals, high quality unfunded in ERC, or in Marie Curie, only 1 in 6 proposals has been funded. So at least to get to 25% of success rates should be our target. And the second point is on the way we need to strengthen research and innovation to foster industry competitiveness. And this certainly needs to address security issues and the defense question, but also the way the framework program can foster and stimulate the business expenditure in R&D. And this brings the most fundamental discussion in my view. Again, we know that almost 80% of the framework program is just distributed, is a way to distribute funding throughout Europe. And this is like that because it's the decision of member states and European Parliament members. So will we be able to have a different distribution of funding and therefore not just using the framework program to distribute funding? And that will be probably the most critical discussion by addressing the future of European research and the development. Beyond industry competitiveness, we also know that we need more and more research and innovation to address societal challenge. Again, this is not a new discussion. Either 15 years ago, when Horizon 2020 was created and introduced societal challenge, and 8 years ago, when, together with Pascal Lamy and many others, the Horizon Europe was created, there was been not an agreement on the way to separate research for industry competitiveness and research for societal challenge. And again, all the programs have been put together. So the question is, how far do we need specific tools to address competitiveness and societal challenge? And again, I bring part of the discussion here, and this is important because the 80% of so-called Pillar 2 these days has been distributed in average through consortiums of 11 partners for projects between 2 and 5 years, most of the projects 3 years, where the funding per partner per year is only 127,000 euros. And this is the question to reflect. This has been an excellent instrument to distribute funding and to promote collaboration. But this instrument is not able to foster competitiveness or to address specific societal challenges like the public goals or carbon neutrality. So how far we as European citizens can understand the need to adopt some instruments towards joining forces for an European view of the role of research and innovation. And this is probably the most difficult question for years to come. Last but not least, so I spoke about competitive excellence, about industry competitiveness and societal challenge. The fourth key issue, which I believe a transformative agenda needs to address, is the building up of the European research and innovation ecosystem. And this certainly needs to tackle the question of research infrastructures, because they are just concentrated essentially in 4 countries, but also the issue that Jean-Pierre brought already, and we have been working on that, about research careers, the current situation of Europe of continuous brain drain, particularly not only for small countries, but mainly from large countries like France and Italy to the United States, is very much associated with our capacity to develop research careers for young researchers. At the same time, we need to address the so-called widening countries and regions. So, my main plea here is to ask to participate. Certainly, I will do from my part the best I will be able to promote a report, but the discussion goes very much beyond these high-level groups, and so actively participate on this question of a transformative agenda in Europe to look at people, at the planet, at prosperity of our citizens, and peace, and the way we can, step by step, putting together a transformative agenda, in my view, together of the building up of a true research and innovation union. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Manuel Heitor, for your singular point of view, introducing social issues also in all those discussions. Thank you very much. A question for Manuel Heitor? No? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Manuel Heitor again. Thank you. Now, I invite Anna Moral from École Polytechnique de Lausanne and Guillaume Clossat, President of EuropaNova and President of T-Life, to conclude with short word this symposium.
I'll start answering the question you asked before about how we innovate. I think for innovation it's important to have an ecosystem around the university that fosters dialogue with industry, with innovation park very close by, with mentors, with entrepreneurs that come to mentor the young people, and with instruments that help funding small ideas and bigger ideas at different steps. And this you get there. And if you look at EPFL, I look at Caltech, where I was a postdoc, and I also started a company, and there the difference is capital. And at EPFL, we started a startup with 100K. When I started the company at Caltech, we started with 3 million. And this is 20 years ago. And I think this makes a big difference, so we need to do something to get more venture capital investing in our companies, because later on they all go to US or Asia, and we lose them, and we lose that richness, all the treasures we have here. And I think if I learned something from you, we need action, we need moonshots, and we need to have a global vision all together and avoid fragmentation.
I need to make something, but I will do it after. I just want to rebound on a certain number of keywords. Risk. We really need to develop a better risk culture in Europe. And this is not only in funding. We need to have private companies and public organizations to invest and to order, to purchase, procure projects. It's very important because they are doing it in the US, and this is the condition for owner to keep the ownership of the company. Antoine Petit outpointed that the GAFA were investing massively, but who are the owner of the GAFA? The founder. And in Europe, it's not possible to remain owner of your company, because the funding system is not working. So we need public and private organizations to take risk and to invest in innovation. And this is fundamental. And that's the condition also for disruption to come to European market. First thing. Second thing, we spoke about defense. That's very good. But in the US, in China, you have the army. And the army is defining where to invest. if we are only investing in defense industry, we are not going to invest in risk. So we need to connect armies, European armies, and the defense industrial effort. Otherwise, it's nonsense. And at the moment, there is no link. And there should be also a link with private industry, because we need dual investment. Third thing, fully agree with what Manuel said about the fact we need to develop ownership at the level of political leaders. And I'm very happy that the work we have done with Conclave report, where we met half of the head of state and government and many political European leaders, seems to have a result in terms of awareness. But we also need citizen awareness. And as far as we speak about research, citizens need to understand how this effort is going to be profitable for them. When we speak about health, we should speak about how to improve diagnosis for everybody in terms of cancer, for example. When we speak about food, they should understand how European research is going to support farmers in order to provide good quality food which is sustainable. When we speak about cybersecurity, they should understand how this is going to support their own security. Otherwise, there is a disconnection. And even if leaders understand, they don't make it a top priority. So we need really to connect citizens and research. The research and innovation community has a specific role in this field. And there is also a need of ownership with regard to that. Yeah, and the last thing I wanted to point out that also Mr. Petit spoke about is the link between company and academia. It's not a one-sense link, it's a double-sense link. And in European research, it's only a one-sense link. So many innovation and many research projects are initiated by companies. And companies should be able to, Manuel, it's important. Companies should be able also to lead European research projects. Because very often they are the innovator, and they have PhD, they have experience, and they are guiding the public research. So it should be a double way, a double sense, and not a one sense. And there we can have leverage. But this is not included at the moment in European research. And the last thing is, of course, independence. We need independence both for research and both, as Nobel Prize Tirol reminded it, for industrial policies. Because we are in a period of high populism, and in this